So let me talk for a moment about FEMA. As I recall, there's no one in the room from FEMA, correct? Okay. So FEMA is, I have found a really good federal partner in flood protection. And it's been a bit of an evolution, in my opinion, for how the agency has reacted. When I first started in this back in 2003, and we would meet with FEMA and we would say, you're about to remap us. When you do so, we won't be able to build those homes in the Plumas Lake development that I told you about. Those homes are funding my construction project. If you remap us, I'm losing the revenue I need to build the levees. If I lose the revenue I need to build the levees, then my people who are already there are going to be at risk. I know it puts more people at risk, but over the long haul, statistically, this is the right thing to do. FEMA's response was, we're not about flood protection, good or bad, we're about mapping, that's our job. And so there was a little bit of a disconnect at first between what FEMA thought its job was and how that job would affect actually providing improved flood protection. Over time, FEMA has evolved in that thinking and has now said, we actually really do believe, I'm not saying they ever thought they didn't believe, but we really have our actions match up with trying to reduce flood risk. And so anything we as FEMA can do that is responsible, mature, and not disingenuous is appropriate for FEMA to do. And so FEMA is a willing partner to help reduce flood risk and will work with you often on the timing of remapping when you have an active project to solve the problem. And FEMA doesn't want to waste money doing a map that's going to be wrong a year later when you finish your project. So for communities that have recently been remapped, I suspect FEMA is the big ogre right now. They have created your problems, and for that, I'm sorry, because that's the reality of what's going on. For communities that have not been remapped, my experience is that if you can get a project going and online, FEMA may be flexible in the timing of their mapping in recognition of the good work you're doing to reduce flood risk. So this one, if you can't read it, says, I get 20% off my flood insurance for having the oars installed. And it really exemplifies the fact that the threat of mapping is a great motivator for local behavior. The people in the room right now are all people who know about flood risk, care about it. Our job is to protect people. That's why we're in this business. The average citizen is like the couple in the car in that first slide sitting in the water and saying, I guess we should get going again. They have no memory of the last time it flooded. They have no real understanding of the flood risk. They don't really understand the devastation to their life if they're flooded and they get flood insurance, but now they have to rebuild their house and it didn't cover everything. And it only covers rebuilding the house. It doesn't cover the lost wages because their employer was underwater. It doesn't cover the fact that now the sewer bills are going to be much higher because the sewer treatment plant went underwater. So they really don't understand it. One of the most effective techniques for getting the public to understand is remapping. And so while you never want to use it as a stick, you'd much prefer to use carrots. Where you have sticks, where FEMA has remapped or is threatening to remap, the reality is that threat of remapping really does motivate good, responsible behavior from local citizens. So with that, I come to my last slide, my lessons learned. And hopefully what I've shared with you is, hopefully you get some optimism out of it in addition to the trepidation associated with a complex process and one that seems a little bit overwhelming at times. What I've seen is that communities that have worked together have accomplished the most. I didn't include on the slide the communities I know of that elected not to work together. There are some in California who have taken a very different approach. That approach usually starts with a lot of blaming the Corps because there isn't really a flood risk. You say that enough to the newspapers that every citizen believes there isn't a flood risk, and then it's pretty damn hard to put a project in place once you convince everyone there's no flood risk. So then you're stuck with an actual flood risk, flood insurance rates, and a citizenship that doesn't desire to solve the problem. So you do have to come together, and you'd really have to work together to accomplish these things. Secondly, communities that have backup plans have been the most nimble and have not gotten bogged down. Anyone here read The Martian? Oh, it's a great book. It there's a movie coming out with Matt Damon next year. He stars in it. But if you read the book, it's about a guy who gets stranded on Mars and has to survive, and then how he eventually gets back. And it takes place over the course of 2 years. And the reason I bring it up is there's contingency plan after contingency plan after contingency plan. And the communities that have succeeded have not had a single track to get there, because that track will inevitably break down at some point. The communities that have succeeded have had multiple tracks. They have always had backup plans. They have always had a continuing relationship with the Army Corps of Engineers where possible, because they knew that one day the Corps would probably be a very important part. They have looked for creative funding sources. They have looked to what they could do themselves. They have looked for unique partners like restoration entities that want to do some restoration and are willing to fund a levee setback in order to get that restoration in place. Those are the success stories. Clear communication of physical and financial risk has been the most effective motivator for the public. You can't just make it about a regulatory issue. You can't just make it about their pocketbook. You have to help the public understand that flood risk is real. That in a community, if you have 4 communities that have a 100-year level of protection, statistically, one of those communities will flood during a 30-year period of a home mortgage. So 4 communities with a 100-year level of protection, statistically, one of those 4 will flood during a 30-year period. That's a whole lot scarier than when you talk about a 100-year event. A 100-year event doesn't sound very scary. The statistics do sound scarier. When you can motivate people to understand their real risk, and you can motivate them through the financial advantage of advancing a project, then we have had real good success with our communication strategy that have motivated people. And finally, communities with clear messages to federal partners, whether the Corps or FEMA, and that have developed quality relationships have moved the fastest through regulatory challenges. Beating up on an entity or an agency whose job is actually to accomplish the same thing as you doesn't succeed, doesn't help a lot. Blaming other people doesn't help a lot. Having a real open dialogue and a real great partnership, that has been the most successful. So I appreciate the chance to talk with you today. Hopefully this has been educational and positive, in addition to a little scary. I understand from Steve that I'm here and around to answer questions, and my understanding is he will adopt the format this afternoon to make it most valuable for everyone in the room. So thank you for the chance to talk.